When Max's tail wagged as the car pulled over, he thought he was going on an adventure, but when the door slammed and the engine roared away without him, Max realized this was no ordinary trip. What this loyal dog did next stunned an entire town. This is the story of a dog who walked over 100 miles, through storms and starvation, across unknown lands, all to find the people who left him behind. Max was the kind of dog who believed in the goodness of people. Every morning, he would sit by the window, waiting for the sound of the keys jingling, a sign that a car ride might be in his future. His owners, Dan and Melissa, were a young couple with 2 kids, Hannah and Logan. They had adopted Max when he was just a chubby puppy from the local shelter. For 4 years, Max had been part of every birthday party, every backyard barbecue, and every Christmas morning. To Max, this family was his entire world. He especially loved Logan, the youngest of the 2. Logan was 7 and had a habit of sneaking Max scraps under the dinner table. He would whisper little secrets into Max's ear about how he didn't want to go to school, or how he thought his sister was annoying, or how Max was his bestest buddy ever. But things had changed in the past few months. Dan had lost his job. Money became tight. Arguments became louder. The kids were sent to their rooms more often, and Max's food bowl wasn't always full. Melissa took on double shifts, and Dan became distant, barely acknowledging Max at all. Still, Max remained loyal. One night, while Max lay curled in his usual spot near the couch, he heard them arguing. "We can't even afford the vet bills," Dan shouted. "He's part of this." "Family Dan," Melissa snapped. "We have to make choices. He's just a dog." "No, he's more than that to the kids. To you, maybe. But I'm not driving 3 hours to visit your sister with that mutt in the car." Max raised his head. His ears twitched. It was a bright morning. The air smelled like dew and gasoline. Max wagged his tail furiously when he saw the suitcases being loaded into the back of the SUV. He bounced around the driveway, excited and ready for the adventure. Logan came running. Up to him. "You're coming too, right, Max?" Max licked his face and barked in response. Of course he was, but Dan gave a sharp whistle. "Leave him alone, Logan. Go help your sister." Melissa knelt beside Max, petting his ears. "I'll talk to him," she whispered. It felt like an eternity before they finally got on the road. Max was left in the back seat, tongue lolling out, eyes sparkling. He loved car rides, but 2 hours into the drive, they took a turn off the main highway, down a narrow, dusty road that led into a wooded area. Max's ears perked up, confused. This wasn't the route they usually took. The car slowed. It stopped. The back door opened. "Come on, boy," Dan called cheerfully. Max leapt out, tail wagging, and then the door slammed. The car reversed quickly, gravel spraying. Max barked, ran after it, barked again, confused, panicked. The SUV disappeared into a cloud of dust. Max was alone. At first, Max waited. Surely they would come back. Maybe Dan had just forgotten something and was circling back. Maybe Logan had begged to bring him along. So Max sat there, wagging his tail less and less with each passing hour. The sun dipped behind the trees. Cold crept in. Crickets sang. Still, Max waited. A howl echoed in the distance, not his own. Coyotes. Max curled into a tight ball beneath a bush, shivering. His stomach growled. He was not used to hunger, nor to betrayal, but his loyalty was strong. He still believed they would come. Max woke up with dirt in his fur and a heavy ache in his limbs. His paws were sore, and the pads were beginning to crack. Still, he followed the road they had taken, sniffing the air, the gravel, the scent trails. He found tire tracks, a plastic cup with Logan's favorite cartoon character on it. Max sniffed it and wagged his tail weakly. He was on the right path, but the world was larger than he knew. Cars rushed by on highways, horns honked. People didn't stop for a stray dog with sad eyes. He drank from muddy puddles, ate grass. Once he found a torn fast food wrapper with a few fries inside. A treasure. Night fell again. Still no sign of his family. But Max was determined. Max dreamed that night of when Logan used to lie on the floor with him, telling stories about space and monsters and superheroes. Of Melissa brushing his fur on the porch. Of the time they had all gone to the lake and Max had jumped into the water only to panic halfway in and be pulled out by Dan. Dan had laughed back then. Max missed that laugh. When Max woke up, he limped forward. His legs hurt, but his heart hurt more. 3 days in, Max came to a river. It was wide, cold, and fast-moving. He could see a bridge far in the distance, but his instincts told him it was too far off his path. He sniffed the edge, looked back the way he came, then stepped into the water. The current yanked at him immediately. His paws slipped on slick rocks. He struggled, kicking furiously, but his strength was no match. Just when he thought he might be pulled under, his claws caught on a fallen tree near the edge. He dragged himself up, coughing, soaked, gasping. He had almost died, but he didn't, because he couldn't stop. On the 5th day, Max wandered into a small truck stop on the outskirts of a rural town. He was covered in dirt, ribs beginning to show. Flies buzzed around him. Some people ignored him. Others shooed him away. But one man, an elderly trucker named Ray, noticed the dog's eyes. Ray tossed a piece of his sandwich. Max devoured. It then backed away. Ray crouched. "You lost, boy?" Max looked at him, a deep, soulful gaze that said everything. Ray noticed the collar, faded, worn, but still there. "Well," Ray muttered, "you don't look like no stray to me." He gave Max water, took a picture of the collar, and posted it online. But Max didn't stay. That night, as Ray slept in his truck, Max walked off again, because the scent was stronger now. He was close. It had been 7 days since Max was abandoned. He limped into the edge of a small city, tail low, body thin, eyes determined. He stood on a hill overlooking rows of homes, lights glowing from the windows, and somewhere, in one of those homes, Logan was asking about him. Somewhere, Melissa was staring at an empty food bowl. Max's heart beat, faster. He took one step forward, then another. The journey wasn't over yet, but the city was waiting, and Max was ready to find his way home. The city was unlike anything Max had encountered on his journey so far. The air smelled of smoke, grease, and asphalt. Horns blared. People rushed past without looking down. Towering buildings loomed over him, casting long shadows over the cracked sidewalks. Max stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed. For days, he had navigated through woods, rivers, and fields, open, quiet spaces where the wind carried the scents of deer, grass, and earth. But here, everything was sharp, chaotic, and loud. He ducked as a bus whooshed by. The smell of exhaust stung his nose, but beneath all of that, somewhere, was a scent he recognized. Faint, like the echo of a memory, Melissa's perfume, Logan's shampoo. Home. Max kept walking. As the sun dipped low, Max turned down a narrow alley, hoping to avoid the traffic and confusion of the main streets. But halfway through, he stopped dead. 3 dogs stood in his path, strays hardened by city life, a mottled pit bull mix with one eye, a wiry terrier with scars across his muzzle, and a massive mutt with drooping jowls and cracked yellow teeth. The big one stepped forward, growling. Max lowered his head and tail, not in fear, but in respect. He wasn't here to challenge anyone. He just wanted to pass through. But the city didn't work like the woods. Here, survival was everything, and trust was in short supply. The terrier lunged first, snapping at Max's leg. Max dodged and backed away, barking once, loud and sharp. It was a warning. He didn't want to fight, but he wasn't defenseless. The one-eyed. Pitt circled him, growling low. Max snapped his jaws in the air, a warning shot. The message was clear. I don't want trouble. Let me pass. After a tense standoff, the leader, the big mutt, grunted. He ain't from here, he rasped. Just passing through. The other dogs hesitated, then backed off. Max gave a small nod and continued down the alley, bruised but unhurt. City life was different. But Max had changed, too. That night, Max found shelter beneath an old bench in Sakinde, a quiet park. He curled his aching body into a tight ball and tried to rest. But the memories came again. He remembered a day not long before the trip. Logan had come home from school sick, coughing, flushed, quiet. Melissa had hovered around him, worried, and Max had curled up beside him on the couch, resting his head on the boy's chest. Logan had whispered, "Don't worry, Max, I'll be okay." Max had stayed by his side all night, only leaving when Melissa gently nudged him away to change the sheets. That was the kind of love Max gave freely, the kind of love he believed in, and that was the kind of love that pulled him forward now, step by painful step. The next morning, Max was limping worse than before. His left paw was raw and swollen, and hunger gnawed at his belly. He dragged himself across a crosswalk and collapsed beside a flower stand. A voice chirped behind him. "Oh no! Doggy?" Max lifted his head weakly. A girl, maybe 10 years old, knelt beside him with a backpack slung over one shoulder and pigtails, bouncing as she moved. She reached into her lunch bag and pulled out half a sandwich. Max looked at it, hesitant. She broke off a piece and laid it gently in front of him. He sniffed. Turkey. Hunger won. He ate. Her mother came out of the shop startled. "Emmy, don't touch stray dogs." "But he's hurt, Mom." The woman sighed, glancing at the mangy dog curled up beside the flower pots. "Fine, but don't touch him. And wash your hands." Emmy sat beside Max anyway, petting his head, gently. "What's your name?" she asked. Max wagged his tail faintly. "Okay," she said. "Your name is Rusty." Max didn't respond, because that wasn't his name, but he let her pet him anyway. That night, Emmy left a blanket and a bowl of water by the flower stand. Max drank and curled up on the soft cloth. For a few hours, the pain faded. But when morning came, he was gone again. The scent was getting stronger. 3 days into the city, Max's body was running on fumes. But his nose led him to a small yellow house on the edge of a neighborhood that looked oddly familiar. It had white shutters and flower boxes and a red mailbox. His tail began to wag. He trotted up the front lawn, heart pounding. This was it. He scratched at the door. Inside, footsteps. Max barked once, joyful, expectant. The door creaked open. An elderly woman in a robe peered out. Her expression twisted into concern. "Oh my goodness, you poor thing." Max's tail slowly stopped wagging. It wasn't them. The scent was there, but it was wrong. Faint, just someone who maybe used the same detergent or soap. The woman laid down a bowl of food. Max ate it, but his spirit sagged. He'd come so far, but he hadn't found them yet. Scene 6. The shelter call. Melissa's despair. Meanwhile, in a quiet suburb 15 miles away, Melissa sat on the edge of Logan's bed, holding his stuffed bear in her lap. Logan stared out the window, refusing to talk. It had been over a week. No one spoke about what Dan had done, but the silence screamed louder than any argument. Then the phone rang. "Hi," said a man's voice. "I'm calling from a truck stop, just off Route 17. I found a dog with a collar. Says his name's Max. Posted about him online. Someone said you might be the owner?" Melissa's heart stopped. She grabbed the laptop and pulled up the post. The picture was blurry, but unmistakable. "Dan!" she shouted. Dan came in grumbling. "What?" "Someone saw Max. He's alive!" Dan stared at the screen. His jaw clenched. That was over a week ago. Could be long gone by now. Melissa shook her head. We have to look. Dan sighed, but didn't argue. That evening, dark clouds rolled in. By nightfall, the sky cracked, open. Rain pounded the streets. Thunder rolled like distant war drums. Max took shelter beneath a rusty dumpster behind an old hardware store. Lightning flashed, and he whimpered softly. He remembered storms back home. How Logan would hide under a blanket, and Max would press against him, brave even when Logan wasn't. They'd sit like that until the storm passed. Now, Max was alone. Wet, cold, exhausted. The pain in his paw flared with every heartbeat, and yet, he didn't stop believing. The next morning, the rain had washed away much of the city's noise. The world felt calmer, clearer, and that's when Max caught it. A scent, faint but real. Melissa's shampoo, Logan's shirt, the smell of home. He followed it across busy intersections, through playgrounds and schoolyards. Every turn brought a memory. The route they took to soccer practice, the park they'd visited last summer. He was getting close, and then he saw it. Up ahead, a familiar bench, and sitting on it, a boy, small, blonde, wearing a Spider-Man hoodie. Max froze. He stared. The boy looked up. Their eyes met, and Max barked, a single, breathless, joyful bark. The boy gasped. "Max!" Logan leapt from the bench as Max bolted toward him, tail wagging furiously, barking with abandon. But as they collided in a joyful heap, a woman's voice screamed, "Logan! Get away from that stray!" Melissa came running, horrified. Then she saw the dog. Her breath caught. "Max?" He licked her hand. Melissa dropped to her knees and began to cry. Dan stood nearby, silent. The prodigal dog had returned. But the story wasn't over, because even now the family would face a question bigger than abandonment or forgiveness. Could trust be rebuilt? Max lay curled on a blanket in the living room. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, the familiar rhythm of Logan's footsteps on the stairs. It all should have felt like coming home. But something was different. He watched the family from the corner of the room. Melissa sat at the kitchen table, head in her hands. Logan whispered to Max across the room and tossed him bits of chicken under the table. And Dan hovered like a stranger in his own house, pacing, distant. Max wagged his tail slowly when Logan touched him, but he didn't leap into anyone's arms. He didn't trust this peace. Because he still remembered the moment that truck door slammed and left him on the roadside. He remembered watching it drive away. And now, even though the smells and voices were the same, the bond had frayed. The next morning, Melissa took Max to the vet. He trembled as she opened the car door, not because he was scared of the vet, but because he didn't know where he might end up next. "Shh," she said softly, brushing his ears. "I promise, you're safe now." At the clinic, Dr. Renner examined him gently. "Poor guy," the vet murmured. "He's got cracked paw pads, dehydration, a few ticks, and his back legs inflamed from overuse. He's been through a war." Melissa nodded silently, tears in her eyes. "But he's tough," Dr. Renner added. "It's a miracle he made it this far." Melissa looked at Max with new awe. "He didn't just make it," she said. "He came home." That afternoon, Logan sat cross-legged on the living room floor with a stack of crayons. He drew a picture of Max, scruffy, tired, but smiling. Above it, he wrote, "Max the Brave." He added mountains, roads, rivers, and thunderclouds. He handed the drawing to Max and giggled. "It's you, buddy! You're a hero!" Max licked his face. For a while, the laughter felt like healing. But Dan, sitting in his recliner, barely looked up. That night, Dan stood alone in the garage. He ran a hand through his hair and stared at a cracked photo of their family on the workbench. He remembered that morning so clearly. The argument with Melissa, the stress from work, the bills. And then Max had chewed Logan's backpack. Dan snapped. He told himself it was just a dog. They could get another one. He'd make it quick. Leave Max near a farm road. Maybe someone would take him in. He didn't expect Max to follow the car. He didn't expect the guilt to stick like glue. But it did. And now, seeing Max again, watching him limp through the door, like a ghost come back for justice, Dan felt that weight double. Word spread fast. The story of Max, the dog who walked 100 miles to come home, was irresistible. Emmy's mother had posted on a local forum, the vet receptionist told her friend. By the next morning, reporters were calling. Melissa shut them down at first. But Logan wanted people to know what Max had done. "He's a superhero," he said. "Like the real kind." Melissa finally agreed to a local story. They told the truth, mostly, that Max had gone missing, that he had returned against all odds. What they didn't say was why he had to make that journey in the first place. But Max knew, and every time Dan came into the room, Max would watch him, not angry, not scared, but wary, because forgiveness wasn't something given freely. It had to be earned. One evening, Melissa finally said what had been choking her for weeks. "I know what you did." Dan didn't look up. "You left him." Dan stood silent, jaw clenched. Melissa's voice cracked. "He found his way back, limping, starving, and he still wagged his tail when he saw Logan. Do you know what that kind of loyalty means?" Dan's fists tightened. "I made a mistake." "No, Dan," she said. "You broke our son's heart, and you made Max believe he didn't belong." Dan's eyes flicked toward the couch, where Max lay curled up, one ear twitching. "I'll make it right," he said finally. But Melissa wasn't sure words were enough. That night, Logan crawled into bed with Max curled at his feet. "Promise, you won't leave again," he whispered. Max didn't move. "I don't care if Dad says no dogs on the bed. I want you here." He reached down and hugged Max's neck tightly. "I thought you were dead." Max licked his cheek and Logan sniffled. "Next time, I'll go with you, wherever you go." The boy drifted off to sleep, holding Max like a lifeline, and Max stayed awake for hours, eyes open, watching the shadows move across the ceiling. The next morning, Dan did something unexpected. He went into the garage, pulled out lumber and tools, and started building a ramp beside the porch. Logan watched from the window, puzzled. Dan didn't explain. By nightfall, it was done, a ramp wide enough for Max's limping leg. A small doghouse beside it, lined with fresh straw and a weatherproof flap. Melissa watched from the kitchen, arms folded. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. When Dan stepped inside, Max padded over, slowly. Dan crouched, holding a treat in his hand. "Sorry, boy," he said quietly. Max took the treat, sat down and looked at him. Dan extended a hand, tentative. Max didn't lick it, but he didn't pull away either. A few days later, the principal of Logan's elementary school called. "Would Max like to visit our second graders?" Logan told them everything. "They want to meet the dog who came home." Melissa hesitated, but Logan begged. So the next day, Max walked into a classroom to cheers and claps. Dozens of hands reached out to pet him. One little girl whispered, "I hope my dog would come back too." Another said, "He's like Lassie but real." Max sat calmly as Logan told the story, how Max had walked through rivers and towns and storms to get back to him. The teacher gave Max a medal made of cardboard and foil. "Hero Dog," it read. Max wore it proudly. Later that night, as the family settled in, Melissa stepped outside to water the porch plants. She paused. Something white was stuck in the doghouse door. A letter. She unfolded it. "Dear family, I know what happened to Max. I saw him near Route 6 the night he was left there. I fed him scraps for a week. He wouldn't stop looking toward the highway like he was waiting for someone. You're lucky he still believed in you." No signature. Melissa's hands shook. She walked back inside slowly and looked at Dan, then at Max. He lay curled beside Logan, finally sleeping deeply, trust slowly rebuilding. But ghosts didn't go away easily, and the road back to family was longer than any highway. Melissa couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, eyes fixed on the folded piece of paper resting on the nightstand. The letter haunted her, not just for what it revealed, but for what it implied. Someone had seen Max. Someone had known. She slipped out of bed quietly and padded down the hallway, stopping at Logan's door. Max lay curled up at his feet, twitching in his sleep, caught in a dream or a memory. Maybe both. Melissa walked to the kitchen, poured herself some water, and stared out the window at the moonlit yard. Her mind raced. Who had written the letter? Why now? And why did it sound like a warning, not just a confession? Meanwhile, Dan sat in the garage alone. He turned the key on the old pickup truck, letting it idle in silence. The same truck he'd used that day, the day he left Max behind. The dashboard lights flickered, the same stain on the seat, the same scratchy country station humming low. He remembered the road, the way Max had looked out the passenger window, tail wagging, eager for what he thought would be an adventure. And then, the moment. The roadside turnout, the guilt, the engine revving. The rearview mirror showing Max chasing the truck, smaller and smaller with each second. Dan slammed his fist on the steering wheel, tears in his eyes. I was weak, he muttered, and he didn't deserve that. The next morning, Melissa went to the kitchen, unfolded the letter again, and studied the paper. It was written on the back of a receipt from a gas station. Route 6, she whispered. That's what they wrote. She grabbed her laptop and searched for gas stations on Route 6 within 100 miles of their home. There were 3. One caught her eye, Jake's Pit Stop. Family owned. Since 1972, she remembered the name it used to have a billboard outside of town. Maybe the same Jake still worked there. She made a decision. We're going for a drive, she told Dan later that morning. You and me. The truck rolled down Route 6, familiar and strange at the same time Dan drove. Melissa sat with the letter in her lap, silent. They passed fields, overpasses, faded diners, and rusty fences. Every so often, Dan would glance in the rearview mirror. No Max, just emptiness. You think he came this far on paw? He asked. Melissa didn't respond. They arrived at Jake's Pit Stop just before noon. It was a modest gas station with a diner counter, a few dusty windows, and an old hound lying on the porch. A man in his 60s stepped outside, wiping his hands on a rag. Help you folks? He asked. Melissa held up the letter. Did you write this? Jake's eyebrows lifted. So you're the family. He motioned them inside. Inside the diner, Jake poured 3 cups of coffee. Dog showed up here about 2 months ago, he began. Scruffy, limping, didn't let no one near him, but he waited. Every day, right near the road. Dan looked down at his cup. I gave him scraps from the grill. Burgers, chicken bones. He liked those best. Wouldn't come close, but he watched. Every car that passed like he was hoping for something. Jake stood and walked to the wall behind the counter. He pulled down a Polaroid photo. Max, thinner, dirtier, but unmistakable, standing beside the gas station, ears perked. Melissa covered. Her mouth. He waited there, Jake said. For days, weeks. Then one morning he was gone. Dan looked at the photo. Did he seem scared? No, Jake said. Determined. Melissa said softly. He was following us. Jake pulled out an old paper map from a drawer. I marked the towns where people saw him, he said, unfolding it. Mrs. Tolliver down the road said he slept behind her shed. The vet in Claremont said he came limping through their parking lot one night, and a farmer down near the fork swore a dog barked until he found his lost calf in the dark. Melissa traced the red dots on the map. It was real. Every inch Max had walked, every day he'd survived, it was all here. Dan blinked hard. We didn't deserve that dog, Jake smiled. Maybe, but he thought you did. On the way back, the truck was quiet. Melissa clutched the photo Jake had given them. Dan gripped the wheel tighter than necessary. Finally, she spoke. We can't pretend anymore. Dan nodded. I need to tell Logan the truth, she added. He needs to know what Max really did. What you did? Dan didn't argue. He just said, then we tell him, all of it. That night, they sat Logan down at the table. Max lay beside him, tail thumping softly. Melissa held Logan's hand. There's something we have to tell you, she began. About Max. About how he got lost. Logan listened in silence as Dan told the story. His voice broke more than once. Logan's face crumpled. You left him? Dan's eyes filled with tears. Yes, and it's the worst thing I've ever done. Logan looked at Max, who watched them calmly. But he came back. Melissa nodded. Because he never gave up on us. Logan buried his face in Max's fur. I would never leave you, he whispered. Max licked his cheek. The next morning, Dan posted a new sign at the hardware store. Dog Sanctuary Donations. Help us help strays find home. He'd made a decision. He couldn't undo what he'd done, but he could spend the rest of his life trying to balance the scales. He started volunteering at the animal shelter on weekends. He rebuilt broken dog houses, delivered food to rescues, even took Max along to meet other frightened dogs. Some who saw Max as a legend, and slowly, Max began to forgive. Not because Dan asked, but because he showed up every single day. Just as life was beginning to feel steady again, another envelope appeared. This one tucked inside the doghouse. Melissa unfolded it, hands trembling. This one had only one sentence. You don't know the whole story, and Max's journey isn't over. No name, no signature, just a phone number scribbled hastily on the back. She called it. It rang once, twice. Then a voice answered, I need to talk to you about your dog. I think he's been part of something bigger than you realize. The line went dead. Melissa stared at the receiver, and for the first time since Max returned, she felt afraid. The silence in the kitchen after the call was deafening. Melissa stood, there, phone in hand, staring at nothing. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. One sentence, just one, had cracked open the fragile piece they were trying to rebuild. Max's journey isn't over. She turned to the window and watched Max through the glass. He was lying in the yard with Logan, chasing butterflies lazily with his eyes. He looked peaceful, content, home. But someone out there knew more, and they weren't done with him yet. Dan walked into the room moments later, wiping grease from his hands. Melissa showed him the note silently. He read it once, twice. Then slowly he folded it, placed it on the counter, and said nothing for a long time. Finally, could be a prank. Melissa shook her head. That wasn't a prank. You're sure? She met his eyes. They knew Max. They knew he came from farther than we thought. And that tone? That wasn't someone messing around. Dan sighed and rubbed his temple. Maybe someone's just trying to cash in on the story. I mean, it's gone viral. Someone might be jealous or bitter. Melissa didn't respond. Her instinct said otherwise. Later that day, she called the number again. This number is not in service, the automated voice replied. Melissa frowned. She logged onto her computer and tried a reverse lookup service. The result surprised her. The number wasn't registered to a person. It belonged to a payphone, one still in operation in the tiny town of Wren Hollow, a place nestled between canyons and farmlands about 60 miles away. That rang a bell. She pulled out Jake's map from the drawer and searched for the town. There it was, circled faintly in pencil. One of the places Max had passed through. She stared at the map, chills creeping up her arms. Why did that town matter? While Melissa pondered the phone call, Logan made a discovery of his own. He was helping Max dig a hole beneath the apple tree when he noticed something clinking in the dirt. He brushed away the soil and found a small, rusted dog tag, completely unfamiliar. It wasn't Max's current collar. This one was old, faded, and bent. Logan turned it over. The engraving read, Angel, property of RCR by 8719. He ran inside with it. Mom, look what Max dug up. Melissa blinked. That's not his. Dan turned it over slowly. What's RCR? Logan asked. Melissa shrugged. I don't know. But Dan's face had gone pale. He whispered, Ridge Creek Rescue. That night, Dan sat down and typed Ridge Creek Rescue into the search bar. At first, nothing but old Facebook posts and adoption listings, but the deeper he dug, the stranger it got. He found archived articles, old news reports buried in local papers, stories of dogs being moved through the area, rumors of a rescue organization that operated more like a transit hub. One story hinted at something darker: stolen pets, experimental training, and illegal tracking chips. One post from a forum read, they called it a rescue. But they were training strays for something else. Don't ask too many questions. RCR isn't what it looks like. Dan stared at the screen. Max had been on the road for weeks. What if he hadn't just wandered? What if he was running? The next morning, Melissa called Jake. He picked up on the second ring. Jake, did Max have a collar when he showed up? There was silence on the line. Jake? Yeah. He did. Faded red thing. Didn't look right. Did it say RCR? More silence. Then, how do you know about that? Melissa swallowed. He dug up another tag. From a dog named Angel. Same place. Jake sighed. You're digging into something you might not want to find, miss. RCR ain't in operation no more. But they were a big deal around here once. They trained dogs. For who? That's what people never figured out. And Max? Jake hesitated. Maybe he came from there. Maybe he saw something. I don't know. But I think someone does. Melissa returned to the map and Jake's Polaroids. One stood out, behind Max. In the photo was a man sitting on the porch of the gas station. Hard to see, mostly shadowed. But there was a logo on his cap. RCR. She scanned the image and enhanced it with a photo app. The man had a scar running down his left cheek. His hands were gloved, watching Max intently. Not a passerby, a watcher, someone who knew Max. She printed the image and took it to Dan. This man was following him. Dan stared. Then the question isn't why Max came home, he said. It's what he was running from. They left the next morning. Just Dan, Melissa, and Max. Wren Hollow was a ghost town of cracked sidewalks, boarded-up windows, and the occasional curious face behind lace curtains. They parked near the gas station with the payphone. Melissa stepped out, Max on a leash. Immediately, Max's body language changed. His ears flattened. He growled, low and unsure. You recognize? This place? She whispered. They walked to the phone booth. On the ground beside it was a paw print. Fresh, huge, not Max's, and beside it a scrap of fabric. Dan picked it up. It was a patch from a jacket. The letters RCR stitched onto it, burned at the edges. A mile down the road, they found the warehouse. It was rotting, empty, and huge. A faded sign on the front read, Ridge Creek Rescue, Home for All Paws. Max refused to step inside. Melissa went first. Inside were rows of cages. Most were empty, but some held chewed-up leashes, broken bowls, scattered bones, and on the far wall, a chalkboard with faded notes. Training schedule. Max, Angel, Bruno, Trixie. Dan's heart froze. Max was here, he whispered. Melissa found a desk drawer filled with old files. She pulled one out. Max 412. Inside, photos, measurements, GPS tracking records. Training assessments, all dated over a year ago. Dan flipped to the final page. Failed, unsuitable for field work, rejected. As they exited the building, the sun setting behind the hills, Melissa spotted something shiny on the ground. A bullet. Casing. Not old, recent. Then she heard it, crackling footsteps in the brush. Dan turned. "We're not alone," a voice called out from the trees. "I told you not to come looking," Max growled, low and furious. A figure stepped into the fading light. Same scar, same cap, the man from the photo. "You shouldn't have brought him back," he said. He was supposed to disappear. The clearing was silent, except for the crunch of leaves beneath the man's boots. He stepped into the open, revealing himself fully. His face was weathered, the scar down his cheek pink and fresh. He wore a torn flannel shirt and a utility belt slung around his waist. Tools, not weapons, but ominous just the same. Max bared his teeth, fur bristling along his spine. Dan stepped. In front of Melissa and Max, hands up. "We don't want trouble," Dan said. "We just want answers." The man tilted his head. "That dog is tagged." Melissa's heart skipped. "What does that mean?" He pointed to Max's shoulder. "There's a chip in him, deep, next to the spine. You wouldn't find it unless you were looking. That's how we tracked him. For weeks." Dan's fists clenched. "You're from RCR." The man gave a dry chuckle. "I was RCR, until the place shut down." "You think it was just about rescuing dogs?" "No. It was training, testing. That dog, he passed more than you think." He took a step forward. "And now, you've brought him home. And people like me, we don't forget things like that." As the man spoke, Max began to whimper, his tail tucked, ears flattened. His body trembled with recognition. Memories surged forward like floodwaters. The cages, the blinding lights, the buzzers, the shocks, the long corridor where barking never ceased. Where food was a reward only if you obeyed. Where dogs disappeared down one hallway and never returned. Max had run. He'd found a weak link in the fence during a storm. Dug through mud, torn up his paws, but he had escaped. And for months, he ran with one goal. Home. The man reached for something in his belt. Dan acted on instinct. "Run!" Melissa grabbed Max's leash and they tore through the trees, dodging branches, thorns tearing at their clothes. Behind them, the man shouted, "You can't hide him forever!" They ran until their lungs burned. Max ran beside them. No hesitation, no pain, just determination. Finally, they stopped at an old ranger's outpost, long abandoned, half collapsed. But it had a door and a lock. They slipped inside and slammed it shut. Melissa fell to her knees, breathing hard. Max stood at the door, ears sharp, body still. Dan whispered, "What do we do now?" Melissa stared at Max. "We find out everything, and we finish what he started." The next day, they drove straight to the county records office. It took hours of persuasion and a few old favors from Dan's time as a contractor. But finally, an old clerk handed them a stack of documents. One folder stood out, Ridge Creek, inspection and closure. Inside were damning reports. Poor facility standards, unlicensed training operations, missing dogs unaccounted for, noise complaints from neighboring towns, unexplained shipments of medical supplies and tracking equipment. And one shocking line at the bottom of a page. Operations funded through third-party security contractors seeking canine candidates for behavior conditioning. Melissa read it twice. "They weren't rescuing," she whispered. "They were recruiting." In one of the reports, a name stood out. Dr. Evelyn Shull, behavioral specialist, hired by RCR in 2020. Whistleblower. Her statement had led to the facility's shutdown. They tracked her down to a quiet cottage 2 towns over. When she opened the door and saw Max, her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't think he made it out," she said. Melissa explained everything. The walk, the letters. The man in the woods, Dr. Shull poured them tea. Max was one of the most intelligent dogs we ever tested, but he wasn't aggressive. That's why he failed their standards. What were they training them for? Dan asked. Detection, guard work, but also compliance. They had shock systems, behavioral manipulation. Max refused to submit. He resisted. Melissa nodded. He ran. Dr. Schull leaned in. And that's why he's dangerous to them. He remembers too much. If someone's watching him now, it's not because they want him back. She paused. They want to make sure. He never tells anyone what he saw. Dr. Schull took them to her private lab hidden behind her garage. She sedated Max gently and ran a high-resolution scanner along his spine. There, she said, pointing to a screen, embedded in the muscle, a dormant tracking chip, could have been used for real-time GPS or behavioral cues. She carefully removed it, sealed it in a sterile vial, and handed it to Melissa. You need to keep that safe. Why? Melissa asked. Because it's proof, and they'll want it gone. That night, Dan had a plan. If they're watching, us, we can't hide forever. But maybe we can use that. They returned to Wren Hollow under cover of darkness. Max stayed behind with Logan and a trusted friend from the shelter. Dan and Melissa set up motion cameras, trip alarms, and lured their stalker back to the warehouse, this time with lights, a drone, and audio recording equipment. They waited in silence. And then, footsteps. The man appeared, creeping through the side door, flashlight in hand. Dan whispered, "Now." The lights snapped on. The drone buzzed overhead. Dan stepped out with the camera. "You're on record. This goes live in 30 seconds. Unless you walk away." The man froze. "You don't know who you're messing with." Melissa stepped forward, holding up the tracker chip in its vial. "We know more than you think. And this time we're not afraid." The next morning, they uploaded the video. It went viral. The local news picked it up, then national media. Suddenly, Ridge Creek Rescue was back in the spotlight. Former employees came forward. Volunteers admitted they'd seen cruelty but were afraid to speak. Dr. Schull gave interviews. Jake even sent in his Polaroid. And Max became the face of resilience. The dog who walked 100 miles not just to find home, but to escape a nightmare and expose the truth. At school, Logan was asked to write about a hero. He handed in a drawing of Max sitting under the apple tree. His caption read, "My dog Max walked 100 miles to come back to us. He was scared, but he never gave up. He's brave, smart, and loyal. He saved himself, then he saved us." The teacher. 4 weeks later, Melissa stood on the porch watching the sunset. Max sat beside her, head in her lap. Dan joined her, coffee in hand. "You think it's really over?" he asked. Melissa looked out across the field where Logan was playing fetch with Max. "I don't think anything's ever over," she said. "But I know one thing." "What's that?" "Max came home for a reason. Not just to be safe, but to show us we weren't the family he lost. We were the family he chose." Met it on the wall. It began with a single phone call, then 10, then dozens. Melissa sat at the kitchen table, eyes wide as the cordless phone blinked with incoming calls from area codes she didn't recognize. Email notifications flooded her inbox. The YouTube video Dan posted, Max's story, the confrontation, the hidden tracker, had gone viral overnight. Not just local news viral. It had hit international trending lists. CNN, BBC, and animal rights influencers across platforms were sharing it. A national celebrity known for adopting rescue dogs had reposted it with the caption, "The bravest dog I've ever heard of." Max, the hero Logan, came running in from the living room, tablet in hand. "Mom, Max is on the news!" Melissa's breath caught in her throat. From across the room, Max sat calmly, tail thudding against the floor as if he understood that something had changed, but not how large his story had become. By mid-afternoon, they were on Zoom calls with news anchors from New York and London. Max sat dutifully in the background, often turning his head when he heard Logan's voice or Melissa's laugh. "What made you think he was still alive?" one journalist asked. Melissa looked off-screen at Max. "It wasn't logic," she said. "It was faith. Every part of me believed he'd never just leave us. Not without a reason." Dan added, "And once we realized what he'd been through, what Ridge Creek was really doing, we knew we had to let the world see." Even Logan was asked to speak during one segment. When the camera turned to him, he said quietly, "I knew Max would come back. He's my best friend." But not every reaction was celebratory. The following morning, a letter arrived, no return address. Inside, a photograph of Max standing in the street, taken from behind a tree. The ink on the back simply read, "Silence can be safer." Melissa's fingers trembled as she held it. Dan took it from her, face hardening. They filed a police report immediately, but the detective only shook his head. "It's vague. No fingerprints. You've stirred up something, folks. Just be careful." Melissa wasn't surprised. Ridge Creek hadn't operated alone. The facility may have been shut down, but its funders, supporters, and those who benefited from its covert operations, they weren't eager for their secrets to go public. The following Saturday, the local shelter organized a rally to honor Max and raise awareness for ethical treatment of animals. Melissa, Dan, Logan, and Max arrived to find the shelter lawn covered in signs, "Justice for the silent, Max the brave, dogs deserve more than chains and pain." Hundreds of people had gathered, families, vets, former rescue volunteers, even the mayor. Max was quiet amid the noise, but calm, composed. Children came up one by one to pet him. Max let them, never flinching. His trust in people had not been broken, despite everything. The mayor knelt beside him and pinned a medallion to Max's collar. "Honorary Guardian of Hope." Tears spilled down Melissa's face as applause echoed across the crowd. Back home, the mail began pouring in. Logan opened letter after letter, many with crayon drawings of dogs, homes, and hearts. Some came from as far as Japan, Brazil, and South Africa. One little girl from Germany wrote, "Dear Max, you are very brave. My dog ran away once, but he didn't come back. I think maybe he is with dogs like you. Thank you for being strong." Melissa kept every letter. She bought a binder just for them. Max would curl at her feet while she read each one aloud, tilting his head as if he understood every word. One morning, a literary agent reached out. "We think Max's story could be a children's book," she said. "Maybe even a series. True stories like his Change Hearts and Laws." Melissa hesitated. She didn't want to exploit Max. But after long conversations with Dan and Logan, she saw it differently. "If his story can protect other animals," she said, "then we have to share it." The book, tentatively titled Max Walks Home, was already in development within a month. Meanwhile, Dr. Evelyn Schull continued her mission. Empowered by the public support and media attention, she formed a coalition, Dogs Without Fear. She published a comprehensive report linking Ridge Creek to 3 other facilities in different states, each masked as shelters but operating with similar training programs. The tracker removed from Max's spine was used to reverse engineer their system. The FBI opened an investigation. Melissa and Max were called in to testify. Max couldn't speak, of course, but Melissa brought the scarred file folder, the photo, and the chip vial. She told the story, every heartbreaking mile, every letter, every bark in the dark. Months later, Melissa received an unexpected invitation. Humane Hero Awards, Los Angeles, California. They wanted Max to attend. The event was full of celebrities, animal rights advocates, and rescue teams. When Max walked on stage with Logan beside him, the entire room rose in a standing ovation. Melissa took the microphone, voice shaking. "We didn't find Max, he found us. And he didn't just find a way home. He found a way to shine a light On every dog who couldn't. She looked down at Max, tail gently swaying, eyes full of quiet wisdom. He is proof that hope walks, even when the road is broken, even when the heart is hurting. Back home, Melissa opened an old wooden drawer she hadn't touched in months. Inside was the first note Max had left them, muddy, torn, and nearly unreadable. "I'm sorry, I'll come back." She placed it in a frame and hung it in the hallway. Right beneath it, she put Logan's drawing, the one from school, because somehow the two pieces completed each other. A promise made, and a promise kept. One early morning, Logan found Max on the front porch before the sun had fully risen. The old dog sat still, gazing across the dew-soaked yard, tail calm, body relaxed. Logan sat beside him. "You remember the whole walk?" he asked. Max didn't move, but a low, soft woof left his throat. A sound not of warning or distress, but of acknowledgement. Logan leaned his head against Max's shoulder. "We're gonna make sure no dog ever has to walk that far again." 6 months after Max returned, Melissa stood in a newly renovated wing of the town's animal shelter, now renamed the Max Foundation for Rescue and Rehabilitation. Paintings of dogs lined the walls, photographs, mementos, collars, tags. And in the center of it all, a glass display holding Max's original leash, the muddy map of his 100-mile walk, and Logan's school drawing titled, "My Dog is a Hero." Visitors walked through, often tearful. Families, students, veterans. The exhibit wasn't just about Max anymore. It was about every dog who had been lost and every home that had waited. Melissa gave speeches now. She never wanted the spotlight, but when she spoke about Max's journey, about the night he disappeared and the day he limped into their yard again, people listened. The room always quieted, because it wasn't just a dog's journey. It was a return, a reclamation, a message. Even after months at home, Max bore invisible scars. He startled at loud noises. Shadows made him wary. And sometimes he would whimper. In his sleep, paws twitching as though he were still walking those empty roads in the dark. Melissa kept a journal, Max's healing notes. She noted the milestones. Day 12. Max rolled on his back in the sun again, first time since he returned. Day 27. Slept through the night without growling in his dreams. Day 46. Licked Logan's hand during thunder. Day 58. Sat peacefully during fireworks. Each small act was a victory. Not because they erased the past, but because they proved Max was choosing peace over fear. At school, Logan was chosen to speak at the county student showcase. The theme was Journeys. He stood on stage holding Max's photo in one hand and the microphone in the other. "My dog Max walked 100 miles because he believed in love. That's what I think. He didn't stop even when he was scared or hurt. And when he got here, he helped us remember how strong animals are. He taught me that sometimes heroes have 4 legs. And that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you keep going anyway." There wasn't a dry eye in the auditorium. One evening, a storm rolled through the valley. Lightning flashed. Thunder boomed. Melissa sat up in bed, wondering if Max had found his usual hiding spot under the table. But he wasn't there. She found him at Logan's bedside, tail curled around the boy's feet, eyes half-lidded but alert. Logan slept soundly, hand resting on Max's back. Melissa knelt beside him. "You protect him, don't you?" Max nudged her hand gently with his nose. She smiled. "And he protects you." Dr. Evelyn Schull returned to town for a symposium at the university. She stopped by the house with a wrapped parcel. Melissa welcomed her in, and Logan offered her tea like he was hosting royalty. Inside the package was a leather-bound journal. "I collected all of the field reports on Max," Evelyn said. "What they observed, what they missed." She opened the first page, revealing a photograph of Max as a younger dog, eyes still bright but unsure. They thought he was too disobedient, too soft. But that softness, that's what saved him. That's what led him home. She paused. He's not just a survivor. He's a witness. A month later, Logan had an idea. Can we take Max to see the places he walked through? At first, Melissa and Dan were hesitant. Would Max be overwhelmed? Would it trigger memories he'd tried to bury? But Max wagged his tail when they packed his blanket into the back seat and loaded up the car. They visited the rusty bridge where he crossed the river, the gas station where a clerk had shared beef jerky, the hollow log where he slept during the blizzard. Melissa even brought the old map Max had left behind, tracking each place they stopped. In every location, Max sniffed the air, sat for a while, and moved on, calmer now, as if reclaiming those moments from fear. The final stop was the empty field. Near Ridge Creek, Melissa held his leash gently. You okay, Max? He didn't cower. He stood tall, chest out, tail wagging. Then he turned his back on the ruins and walked away. The local newspaper began running a weekly column titled From Max's Porch, written by Melissa. Each article focused on a different lesson Max had taught them: the patience of healing, the importance of safe shelters, the resilience of memory, the enduring power of loyalty. The column became so popular that syndicates across the country picked it up. One woman from Maine wrote, "I've never had a dog, but reading about Max makes me want to be the kind of person a dog like that would walk 100 miles to find." Out of curiosity, and at Logan's insistence, they sent in a DNA test for Max. The results surprised them. 2% Australian Shepherd, 35%, Siberian Husky, 15%, Labrador Retriever, 10% unknown, classified as undomesticated ancestry, Logan laughed. He's part wolf, Dan grinned. Explains the stubborn streak. Melissa framed the results next to Max's certificate from the Humane Hero Awards, part shepherd, part husky, all heart. One day, a letter arrived, postmarked from Montana. It was from Jake, the first person who had helped Max on his journey. He'd seen the news and recognized the dog in a heartbeat. Inside the envelope was a photo. It showed Jake standing beside Max at the gas station, holding out a half sandwich. Max's tail was wagging in mid-motion. On the back of the photo, he was tired, but he still trusted me. That kind of dog, that kind of soul, it changes you. Melissa pinned it beside Logan's drawing. That night, the family gathered in their backyard. A campfire crackled. Marshmallows roasted. Logan curled up in a blanket beside Max, who was now almost 10 years old. His muzzle was grayer, his eyes softer, but his body was strong, his heart unshaken. Dan leaned over and whispered to Melissa, "Do you think he knows what he did?" Melissa looked at Max, who was staring up at the sky, ears twitching at the sound of night birds. "I think he knows we'll never forget it," she said. Logan rested his head on Max's shoulder. "You're home now," he whispered, "and we're never letting you go again." Max let out a content sigh. The stars twinkled overhead, and for the first time in a long time, everything was still. Autumn rolled into town quietly that year. Golden leaves danced on the sidewalks. School. Buses hummed again, and the early morning fog carried with it a cool promise of change. Melissa opened the window just a crack. The wind whistled through, and with it came a whisper, a distant haunting sound that made Max's ears twitch. He lifted his head from Logan's bed, alert. Logan stirred. "What is it, boy?" Max padded to the window and stared out into the yard, unmoving. There was nothing there, but something in Max's posture said otherwise. Something was coming, and he could feel it. Later that week, Dan brought home troubling news. A new facility, under a different name with clean paperwork and crisp logos, was being constructed just 30 miles north. "They say it's a state-of-the-art training and wellness center," he said, voice tight. "But guess who's listed as one of the silent backers?" Melissa felt her stomach drop. Ridge Creek? Dan nodded. They're using a shell company this time, but it's them, or what's left of them. Logan overheard from the stairs. We stopped them. Max stopped them. Melissa looked at her son, and then at Max, who had entered the room quietly, standing beside Logan like a shadow. We slowed them, she said gently. Now we finish it. Dr. Evelyn Shull arrived 2 days later with binders, flash drives, and an intense gleam in her eye. They're trying to outlast public memory, she said. But we've got something stronger than time, proof, and Max's story isn't fading, it's growing. Together they launched a second campaign. This time not about recovery, but resistance. They called it No More Shadows. It aimed to expose every facility tied to Ridge Creek's methods and philosophies. They enlisted journalists, whistleblowers, and even former Ridge Creek staff who had come forward, ashamed of their silence. Max was the symbol once again. But this time, he wasn't just a survivor. He was the standard. The proof that dogs didn't need to be broken to be loyal. They needed to be loved. One night, long after dinner had been cleared and the lights dimmed, a knock came at the door. Dan answered it cautiously. On the porch stood a woman, early 60s, gray streaks in her tied-back hair, hands trembling. "My name is Alice," she said. "I used to be the intake supervisor at Ridge Creek." Melissa appeared behind Dan, her expression unreadable. "I know who Max is," the woman said softly. "I'm the one who let him out the night he ran. I wasn't supposed to, but I couldn't stand what they were doing anymore." She took out a small photo from her coat pocket. It showed Max, younger, shackled in a pen, eyes wide and untrusting. "I kept this as a reminder of my failure," she whispered. "But maybe now, it can be something else." Melissa took the photo and nodded slowly. "You did one thing right," she said, "and it made all the difference." 3 weeks later, Melissa, Logan, Dan, and Evelyn stood at the head of a massive march. Over 3,000 people gathered at the gates of the newly constructed facility. Peaceful signs, candles, families, rescue dogs wearing shirts that said, "Loved, not broken." Max walked at the front. No leash, no commands. He didn't need them. He walked calmly, purposefully, through the crowd as news helicopters hovered. Overhead and cameras rolled. The governor issued a statement that night. "The facility's funding will be reviewed. Operations are paused pending investigation." Melissa squeezed Logan's hand. "You did this," she whispered. Logan shook his head. "Max did this." That night, Logan had a dream. He was standing at the edge of a long, empty road. The same one. Max had once traveled alone. Only this time, Logan was walking it, with Max beside him. There were no fences, no cages, no fear, just sky and Max. When he woke, Max was lying beside him, tail thudding softly against the bed. Logan smiled. "You dreaming?" "Too, boy?" Max's ears twitched. The sunrise filtered through the curtains, painting the room in gold. One afternoon, a letter arrived addressed to the Max Foundation. It was from a young man in Oregon who had worked at a similar training compound but had quit 2 years earlier after seeing Max's story. "I didn't know better until I saw him," the letter read. "That dog, he had fire in him, not from pain, from loyalty. I've been volunteering at rescues ever since. Thank you for giving him a voice." Melissa added it to the wall of voices in the shelter, a growing mural of testimonials, memories, and gratitude. Max would often sit beneath it, watching the new families come and go, his tail swishing slowly. Logan had been begging for months. "I'm not saying to replace Max, just a little brother for him?" Melissa wasn't sure. Max was older now, slower. Did he want the company? But one visit to the shelter changed everything. A scrappy, one-eyed pup named Wicket ran straight to Max and started tugging on his tail. Max didn't flinch. He let out a low woof, then laid down with a sigh as the pup curled up beside him. Logan grinned. "That's a yes, right?" Dan nodded. "That's a definite yes." Wicket came home that day, and Max, once the lost, lonely traveler, now had a shadow of his own. On Max's 10th adoption anniversary, the family held a bonfire in their backyard. Friends and neighbors came. Evelyn spoke. The mayor read a proclamation naming October 12th, Max the Brave Day in their county. When it was Logan's turn, he kept it simple. I was 8 when Max left. 9 when he came home. I'm almost 17 now, and I've never spent a year without him. He looked at Max, who was laying on a blanket. Wicket curled beside him. I used to think he came back for me, but now I know he came back for all of us. Late that night, a storm rolled in. Logan stood at the window watching the rain fall. In the past, Max would hide, curl up somewhere dark. But now, Max sat by the open screen door, eyes on the horizon, unbothered by the thunder. Logan walked over, sat beside him. "Storms don't scare you anymore, huh?" Max leaned into him gently. They sat there like that, boy and dog, man and companion, watching the storm pass not with fear, but with quiet strength, because some storms aren't meant to break us. Some are meant to show us just how far we've come. The museum had a new display. Framed behind glass was the crumpled, sun-faded letter Melissa had written all those years ago. The one she taped to telephone poles, vet offices, and grocery store windows. Missing dog. Mixed breed. Answers to Max. Last seen near Ridge Creek. Please help bring him home. He is deeply loved. It sat beside a photo of Max at the height of his journey. Thin, mud-caked, eyes tired but standing tall. Beneath it all, the caption read, "He never saw this letter." But he felt it. Visitors lingered there the longest. The house was unusually still. Sunlight streamed through the curtains. Birds chirped outside. Max, now gray-muzzled and slow to rise, lay curled on the living room rug. His breathing was deep and even. Logan sat beside him with a cup of coffee, now 17 and preparing for college. He had turned down dorm life to stay close to home, Melissa noticed. "You sure you don't want the campus experience?" "I'll get my experience," Logan smiled. "But I want Max to be part of it." Max stirred slightly as if acknowledging the words, because he always knew when he was being spoken about, or, more accurately, spoken of. Logan's application to the University of Washington asked for a personal story that shaped who he was. He titled it, "The Road Home is Paved with Paw Prints." He wrote, "Some dogs are trained, others are rescued. Mine rescued himself, and then came back to rescue us. When Max disappeared, I was a kid waiting at the window every day. When he returned, I learned that love is not soft. Love is a force. It walks 100 miles through snow and silence and hunger. It climbs fences. It limps past danger. Max showed me what loyalty really means, not staying when it's easy, but returning when it's hard. I want to spend my life helping animals like Max find their way, not just home, but back to themselves." He was accepted with a full scholarship in animal behavioral sciences. One crisp afternoon, Logan and Max went on a quiet trail walk. No leash. No hurry. They followed the river path near the woods, where Max had once been found during a storm, half frozen, but still moving forward. Now, his steps were slow. Careful. Logan paused under the same old sycamore tree, sat down in the grass, and Max lay beside him. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me," Logan whispered. Max licked his hand. They sat there for a long time, watching the river flow, together. That night, Max ate dinner like normal. He drank from his bowl, nudged Wicket playfully, and settled by the fireplace. Melissa kissed the top of his head. "You'll always be my brave boy." He closed his eyes with a content sigh. In the middle of the night, he woke briefly, looked toward Logan's room, then rested his head on his paws, and peacefully, silently, Max crossed his fina. The town mourned him like they would a war hero. Flags at the shelter were flown at half-mast. The mayor issued a tribute. The headline in the local paper read, "Max the Brave, the dog who walked 100 miles, now rests at home." A bronze statue was erected in front of the shelter. Max, mid-step, ears alert, gaze forward. At the base were the words, "Not all who wander are lost. Some are just finding their way back to love." Logan sat beside it for hours that day, Wicket, curled against his side, all distance. In her last article for the Max Foundation Weekly, Melissa wrote, "We said goodbye to Max this week. He left as quietly as he came home, without drama, without fear. He taught us that family isn't just who we're born with. It's who waits for us, who believes we'll return, who never stops leaving the porch light on." Max walked 100 miles, through hardship and heartbreak. But more than the distance, it was his spirit that changed us. He didn't come back because we called. He came back because he remembered who he belonged to, and we will always remember him. Logan began his first class at university a year later, teaching Animal Psychology 101 as a TA. He opened his slideshow with a single image. Max, standing at the front steps of their home, tail raised, tongue out, looking as though he owned the earth beneath his paws. He said, "This is Max. He wasn't trained to be a hero. He just was. He walked farther than most of us ever will because of instinct, sure, but also because of heart." Today we'll talk about cognition and behavior in domesticated animals. But always remember, sometimes the heart teaches what science can't. Years passed. Wicket grew older, took on Max's routines. He waited at the door when Logan was late. He barked at the fence in the morning, patrolling the borders, and at night he curled up by the fire, always on the same rug Max used to love. One day, Logan placed a new pup beside him, a rescue from a storm just like the one that nearly took Max. Wicket sniffed the pup, licked his ear, and curled around him like a guardian, because love, once given, doesn't die. It echoes. In the quiet dusk of memory, there's a path only Max could walk. It winds through back alleys, frozen fields, lonely woods, and empty bridges. It moves past danger, sorrow, hunger, and fear, and finally it stops, right at the porch of a small house in a quiet town where a boy once waited every day by the window. Max walked that path once, for love, for home, for family. And in doing so, he became something more than a dog. He became a legend, and legends never truly say goodbye. The end.